Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers and sisters and viewers of Iqra TV. Welcome to the second part of Real Talk. Today we've been talking about in two parts. One is to look at how the Muslim community has responded to this pandemic of the coronavirus, COVID-19, and helped and supported those in our community who have found themselves in a vulnerable situation. But also, we didn't mention this, but we talked about this last week. Also the NHS, and I know some of my guests here and the organisations that they represent have done phenomenal amount of work in supporting the very, very extremely valuable workers who work in the NHS, who've been working extremely hard saving people's lives, as well as the care workers who work and look after our elderly people as well. As part of that discussion debate, we also moved on to this issue about how people view the Muslim community, because there's been very negative attitudes towards the Muslim community, and how the Muslim community is stepping forward at this moment in time is slowly changing those attitudes. And then we talked about racism, and particularly the Black Lives Matter campaign, which is currently going on. So I want to talk about racism itself and how the community responds. We've talked about, as before we went into the break, and I'm sorry, Anwar Fatima, I stopped you there. We talked about, Black Lives Matter and the impact of racism. Racism always, there's this view that racism doesn't exist now following the Lawrence inquiry and the recommendations from the Lawrence inquiry, that institutional racism within the local authorities, the police service, the judiciary, no longer exists. Now, we saw this poster that came out from Bradford Council, or allegedly from Bradford Council last week, which showed about Bradford together, but it had no person of colour in that poster. I think there were 8 people on that poster or something like that.
Yep.
As Bradfordians living in Bradford, being people of colour, how did you feel when you saw that poster? I mean, you, Bradford for Better, you were supposed to, you would have thought that people from Bradford for Better and others would be one of the prominent people showcased in that.
Yeah, it did generate a lot of discussion amongst a lot of our members on our Facebook group.
Right.
Both from all sorts of different backgrounds.
Right.
And it's something that we have been discussing recently, and I think it's more of a thing of we need to learn from this.
Mm-hmm.
So the apologies came out and everything like that.
Are you saying that people who were responsible for that campaign, obviously were not sort of so au fait with the issues around equality and inclusion, etc.?
I think it's more of a. It's become very unconscious. I don't think it's an unconscious bias at the end of the day. I don't think they've really personally paid enough attention to it, and I think this is the prime opportunity now with all the other stuff that's going on to kind of take a closer look at it and
but
see.
After 40 years of trying to fight, I mean, I'm sure Anwar Fatima has not been campaigning for that many years. She's too young for that. But after 40 years, because I was sat on the Lord Stephen Lawrence group with the Home Secretary. I was involved in the recommendations and its aftermath, more so the aftermath of it. After 40 years, probably longer for me, since the 70s, trying to fight for equality and social justice, and I see this poster come out, and to me that is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking. You see a council like Bradford,
Yeah.
very large city, multiracial community, has been in this town for generations.
Yeah.
We're now in the 5th generation in some cases, still producing posters like that. How does it make you feel as people of Bradford?
We were naturally angry. I mean, I was appalled when I actually saw the poster, because this is something so visual. This is in the public eye. If you cannot make, I mean, we don't want token gestures to say stick an Asian face in there or somebody with a hijab. We want, to be represented, deep into policy. We want to be represented for our contribution to the Bradford community. And if you can't even show us on a public poster, you've basically just erased us from the whole Bradford community. You've just sort of
as if you
portrayed us we don't exist.
Exactly.
So if that is on the surface, that gives me no hope to sort of think that there's anything deeper going on that keeps us as the BME or the Black and Asian minority ethnic communities, our recognition, our contribution, our service. we are part of Bradford, and if we can't even be shown on a public poster because we've been forgotten about, then that's appalling.
I mean, somebody like you, Anwar Fatima, I mean, it must have been absolutely heart-wrenching to see.
Exactly.
I mean, you campaigned so much for inclusion and equality, not just for the Asian community, for everyone.
For everyone,
right?
absolutely. I think half the battle for us is that they have to constantly be reprimanded. Half of our battle is that we have to constantly bring them to accountability.
Why after 40 years is still fighting this battle?
Because the education it's like every generation is suffering this.
But
I mean, I have to say back from...
Let me ask you a question. 40 years ago, when we started fighting for this, we had no elected representatives on any of our local authorities. One of the things that they said was, well, if we have your representatives, maybe the policies and the practice will change. Bradford has got many, many Asian councillors there, Muslim councillors. Why are we still seeing these type of posters coming out when there are councillors there who should be making sure that it never happens? So, I mean, people like you, how do you feel about that?
Well, again, it feels as though as organisations this is a big aspect and a big time-consuming aspect as well, that we have to constantly make sure that we have got good media coverage. They are showing us in a good light. They are truthful about the stuff that's going on, you know, and you don't have that on a wider scale for the wider British community. The wider British community has this almost like a massive bias that their stories will always be.
That we know, and the work that you've been doing, as I said, the work that people in my area, there's a mosque called Zakaria Masjid in Dewsbury. They've been going out to areas which is predominantly white and have been voting for the BNP for many, many years, and they've now seen the change that's taking place. That is at a community level, which is understandable.
But it's the institutional representation that's going on.
What I'm talking to you about, in that institutions, the people who make policy and who tell the officers what they need to do and how they need to behave is done by councillors. Now you have in Bradford so many Asian and Muslim councillors. Why is it that despite that you still see posters like this coming out? What is wrong?
We're out of touch with politics in Bradford. Our general public actually vote councillors in on media campaigns or their sort of connection or their knowing them rather than the substance of what they can deliver. You know, we don't hold them to account. We don't question what they've actually achieved in a year. How many meetings did they attend? What was the outcomes of that? You know, this campaign, this poster campaign, you know, this should have been nipped in the bud by the councillors long before B4B raised it or any other organisation.
Before the poster actually came out.
I mean, you'd have a sign-off process.
Previous advertisements, because there's a catalogue. You can only go into the archives to see that any substantial project event that's gone on, you know, what has been the representation. And I would even go further as to say that in our community we have a lot of personal funding. We have businesses and organisations that fund outlets like this media platform, and we don't have that across the board. I mean, from the Black Afro-Caribbean community, we haven't had a black councillor for a long time. From my memory, I don't think we have. Lord Mayor, no, definitely not. So where are we going wrong in educating our communities to say it's a fair, level playing field for all? It's not, and mostly it's because of economics
that begs
as well.
the question. It goes back to my point and what Khalil was talking about. We have councillors, we have people who represent the community and in these institutions who should be making sure that a poster like that never comes out. Okay? So are we saying that they're failing in their duty? And if they are, what are people like you who live in Bradford are going to be doing about it?
Well, obviously it's been brought to more attention now.
Right.
And so we are questioning them, we're bringing them to accountability. But at the same time, you've got to understand that sometimes their agenda is not necessarily for the wider community. It's based on, you know, how is the next campaign going to go? Are these people who are financially able in the community to support us the next time we need to be voted in.
That's
so
right.
it's a whole kind of generational gap. The next generation aren't bothered. Their politics aren't about
So
having...
what is the politics? I mean, you are young people. What is the politics of this generation? What are they looking for in their leadership? You know, what are they looking for? More equality, more inclusion? And do you think you're going to get it?
And personally, my generation is probably going to be the one that challenges them.
Right.
Because obviously previous generations have come with the brotherly system and all sorts of other, whichever systems they use, you know, to elect officials. They don't really challenge them. It's all about like face and a name, isn't it, really?
Right.
Whereas, especially since the last few years, I mean, I wasn't politically active, you know, 3 or 4 years ago. I am now, probably because I'm getting more involved in certain things. And I think I've seen that in other people my age as well. And I think this generation of our community, at least, is going to be the one that's probably going to be a bit more honest, a bit more challenging. And because again, they're learning from, they're seeing everything on TV, they're seeing social media and stuff like that. And I think social media and the internet has made a big difference in this as well, is that it's brought a lot more things to light to them. And if you go on Facebook, you see all sorts of people just challenging non-stop. And I think that's going to be the driving force here. I think the previous generation is a lot more used to the way that things
is
are
the
done
young
back home.
generation mobilized sufficiently to bring about that change? I mean, we talk about Black Lives Matter. We've seen in America and even in this country, there's massive protests going on saying enough is enough, right? That we need to see proper and real change. As I said, I was involved in the Lawrence inquiry or the review. I sat on the Home Office, the Home Secretary's Advisory Group for nearly 10, 11 years, looking at all the recommendations and how they're being implemented. And in the last 6, 7, 8 years in particular, we've seen there's a pushback against some of those successes, some of those recommendations, okay? And I was on radio last week talking about the same thing on BBC. Do you think our young generation is really interested in these issues? Or are they sort of, you know, devolved from this particular aspect of their lives?
I think it's again about the economics, because part of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, they had a big project which I was involved in as a late teen called Give Racism the Red Card, because it was directly involved with football as well.
Still
all the
going
black
on?
and it's still going on.
Yep.
And the black footballers, the ethnic minority footballers were being hounded, monkey calling, bananas chucked in and everything. So it was the Football Association putting in money along with the government, along with the police force, European funding, all the rest of it. So it was tackled. But again, these things lose steam
But
once finances are taken out.
It's not being tackled at the moment because, you know, people like Raheem Sterling and others are saying we are still victims of racism.
Absolutely, but even the Football Association, I can't remember the name of him. He's I think Turkish descent. Player for Liverpool, and he made reference to the Uyghur Muslims and the oppression, and he was told off for that.
Yeah, he was.
And now, what's the difference? So now the Football Association can turn around and say Black Lives Matter, and we are on the back of this. All lives matter. All oppression is wrong. We are one human race. Saying the black race or the Asian race, and that again, language. We need to educate our children on language as well.
In terms of that is a very long debate, because historical debate that is going on about the whole of the history. I mean, this issue about removing some of the statues. One was sort of brought down in Bristol.
Yesterday, it's okay to bring down Saddam Hussein's statue and say he's a tyrant.
Just bear with me.
But when you
just bear with me. They brought down the statue in Bristol. They took off the statue in London yesterday. There was a big march yesterday in Oxford to remove the statue from one of the colleges. And there's some debate today about some of the issues. Liverpool have decided to I think, bring down one of their statues. That is on one side. That is fine. I mean, that is rewriting history to a certain extent. But the issue about racism and endemic racism starts at a very young age in schools, and there's the discussion going on about the history books which are being used to teach people in schools at the moment itself are not recognizing how many Muslims do you know fought in the Second World War, right? You ask 20 Muslims, I guarantee you 19 of them will not know. 400,000 Muslims lost their lives in the Second World War. 1.2 million Muslims fought. Now these are things that we don't know. Our children don't know. And we don't teach our children these. So unless they learn these things, we will not know the contribution that we have made to this country as well. Now, those are the issues, the fundamental structural issues that I'm talking about. So how do we bring that change, amongst ourselves first, and then our future generations?
I think we first need to, I was taught in this school system, I never read anything, like we did about the Second World War and stuff, never read anything like that. I think we need to first understand ourselves, our involvement, and then we need to teach that to our kids. But we
the
also
Victoria
need to
Cross is the highest military medal that you can get. One of the first recipients of the Victoria Cross was a Muslim woman, right? Noor Khan. Now, you go out there and ask 100 Muslims,
exactly.
they won't know.
No.
So these are some of the issues that we need to tackle ourselves before we can tackle somebody else. Now, obviously, this is something that is very dear to my heart as well. I know it is dear to yours in particular and others. Jessica, you've been listening to this discussion, debate as well. As a non-Asian person, very quickly, how do you feel at this moment in time about this Black Lives Matter, this campaign that is going on? Do you think it's a positive thing?
Yeah, I do think it's a positive thing. And I went to I don't like calling it a protest because I think that's quite a negative
It's the wrong word, yes.
I went to it on Sunday and it was beautiful. It was all different races. Like, I get all lives matter, but I personally, as a white person, wouldn't say that because I think right now it is people of colour.
Right.
But at the same time, like you said, it's the generations that pass it down. If I teach my kids what I was taught, then it's just going to be a whole bunch of more white people.
I think that is an important point to close on.
Yeah.
I hope you found this discussion debate interesting. I'm sure it has been enlightening. And I always say, as we're getting into the real meat of the debate, unfortunately we have to say, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May Allah protect you and be with you. Please make sure you remember us in your du'as. And inshallah, I will see you next week, when again I hope we're going to bring you a very interesting and lively debate as well. Take care. May God be with you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.